You are looking live inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where the flight control team belonging to Orbit 2 has just taken a poll of its flight control team, and all positions have polled go for the upcoming undocking of the SpaceX Dragon Endeavour, with the 4 Crew-11 crew members on board to start a 10.5-hour journey back to Earth and a splashdown off the coast of San Diego in the wee hours on Thursday morning. Good afternoon. I'm NASA's Rob Navius from the Office of Communications. We'll be joined momentarily by SpaceX's Ronnie Foreman out in Hawthorne, California. The 4 Crew-11 crew members, Endeavour Commander Zena Cardman, pilot Mike Fincke, Kimiya of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov. They're all suited up in their launch and entry suits, having performed leak checks. The hatch was closed a few hours ago between Endeavour and the International Space Station as we point to an undocking time of 4:20 p.m. Central Time, 2:20 p.m. Pacific Time to start that journey home for Crew-11, albeit a few weeks ahead of schedule. On January 7th, the agency announced that it was postponing a planned spacewalk originally scheduled for January 8th, while teams monitored a medical concern with a crew member currently living and working on board the International Outpost. Since then, that crew member has been stable, with no issues reported. That crew member forcing NASA to decide rather rapidly the following day that it was going to return Crew-11 to Earth a few weeks ahead of schedule, with the intent in mind to properly monitor the crew member's health in returning to space and once back on Earth. Again, joining us today from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, to talk about all the specifics about the final preparations leading up to undocking is Ronnie Foreman. Ronnie, great to have you with us today.
Thanks very much, Rob. Crew-11 is the 11th crew rotation mission for Dragon and its 12th flight with NASA's Commercial Crew Program. As you mentioned, Crew-11 launched last year aboard a Falcon 9 rocket on August 1st, 2025, and docked with the station the next day. Right now, the crew is currently suited, and the Dragon and station hatches are both sealed in preparation for Dragon's departure. Once Dragon undocks, the crew's flight home is expected to last about 10.5 hours. We're seeing live views of the crew inside the spacecraft on your screen there. Shortly after separation, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location. Following phasing, Dragon will complete deorbit, reentry, and splashdown. During the deorbit sequence, several events will occur, including trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown. Of course, the Crew-11 astronauts will be able to follow all of that on the screens inside the spacecraft that you see there right now. Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of San Diego, California on Thursday, January 15th at approximately 12:41 a.m. Pacific, which is 2:41 a.m. Central, where it will be picked up by a SpaceX recovery vessel, and our recovery teams will help egress or exit the crew from the spacecraft.
The 4 crew members on board the Dragon Endeavour, who are just minutes away from departing the International Space Station, Zena Cardman, Mike Fincke, Kimiya, and Oleg Platonov, they will have completed 167 days in space, 165 days on board the International Space Station. They will have completed 2,672 orbits of the Earth, a journey of 70.8 million statute miles. Cardman and Platonov wrapping up their first flights, respectively, away from the planet and logged 167 days in space. Mike Fincke is wrapping up his 4th flight into space, a total of 549 days in all. That puts him 4th on the all-time list amongst NASA astronauts, 20th on the all-time list for most aggregate days in space. Kimiya Yui of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency is coming home after his second flight away from the planet and a total of 309 days in space.
Also on board the space station is NASA astronaut Chris Williams, as well as cosmonauts Sergei Kutsverkov and Sergei Mikheyev. Now, just like the approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit are designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Chris Williams helped our crew members prepare for departure today and will be watching from the cupola, but the prime departure monitoring role falls on Zena Cardman from inside Dragon. Mission control in both Houston and Hawthorne will back up our crew as we step them through undocking today. The station crew have been busy preparing to send our astronauts home. Rob Navius has more on what we can expect until Dragon departs from station. Rob?
The road toward the undocking of the International Space Station just a few minutes from now began actually with the decision by NASA last week to bring the Crew-11 crew home just a few weeks ahead of schedule, originally targeted for a homecoming about the third week in February. They had that time frame accelerated in a decision that was reached by NASA, the international partners, and SpaceX, who has all of whom have worked diligently to accelerate the time frame for this return back to Earth. Back on Monday, Mike Fincke, the commander of the space station, participated along with the rest of his crewmates on the station in a change of command ceremony in which he handed over command of the station to Sergei Kutsverkov, the Roscosmos cosmonaut. This would have occurred regardless of when Crew-11 was ready to depart. But the change of command was conducted on Monday morning. Earlier today, as the crew began final preparations prior to undocking, the crew reported that it was feeling very well, in good shape, ready to begin the journey back to Earth that will start with the undocking command that is scheduled about 7 minutes from now. That command will trigger the retraction of an umbilical that has provided power to Dragon while docked to the zenith or space-facing port of the International Space Station. That will be followed by the opening of 2 sets of hooks. Those hooks, 6 hooks per set, they will open up to break the physical connection between the station and Dragon Endeavour. There will be a series of burns of the Draco thrusters to begin an opening rate by Dragon away from the station outside of what is called the approach ellipsoid, which is essentially the imaginary cylindrical boundary of the neighborhood of the International Space Station, at which point the joint operations between Mission Control here in Houston and the SpaceX Flight Control Team in Hawthorne will come to an end, and Hawthorne will take over exclusive control of the rest of Endeavour's flight back to Earth, which, as you heard Ronnie say earlier, will culminate in a splashdown early Thursday morning off the coast of San Diego at 12:41 a.m. Pacific Time, 2:41 a.m. Central Time. Ronnie, you have more details about what will be involved as we approach the time of the undocking command.
Thanks, Rob. So right now we are standing by for that next call from Mission Control, and we'll keep ourselves plugged in so that you can hear, as well as we can, the next updates from our team. Right now, separation is set for approximately 2:20 p.m. Pacific, 5:20 p.m. Eastern, which is just about 11 minutes from now. As we mentioned earlier, just like its approach to the space station, this departure for Dragon and the subsequent deorbit are designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from our crew. Departure is typically faster and easier, since the crew won't have to stop at any waypoints we see, like when the spacecraft arrives. We take particular care, as Rob noted, when we enter the approach ellipsoid and then when we depart again. Once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of 4 departure burns, which are carefully choreographed spacecraft maneuvers that increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, a phasing burn will place Dragon on a trajectory to align it with that splashdown site. As we've had a couple of views here on our screen previously, our crew is inside Dragon right now. They are suited up as we are entering a dynamic phase of flight. We may hear a call out for the crew to also pull their visors down ahead of that actual undocking event itself. So right now we are standing by for that go, no-go call to undock, and then we'll be waiting for the undocking sequence to begin. Once we get that call, it will take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, which has been its home for the last 6 months. At the planned undock time, SpaceX Mission Control will command the undock sequence start, which begins the automatic undocking process. The first step is for the umbilicals to retract. These umbilicals are electrical connections that connect Dragon systems to the space station, transferring power, telemetry, and commands between the two vehicles during Dragon's stay. Once that's complete, Dragon will unlatch itself, just like Rob described, releasing 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. All that combined will take just about 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and begin to move itself further and further away using those Draco thrusters. Dragon's initial departure from station, like I mentioned before, is a little bit different, and it's also different from other docked vehicles like the Soyuz that rely on springs to push them away from the docking port. Dragon will execute 2 short thruster firings to undock using a combination of 12 Draco thrusters around the base of the spacecraft, with the first burn breaking any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second slowly backing the spacecraft away. We are expecting the call for the end sequence to begin in the next few minutes or so. As we continue to wait for that confirmation call for undocking, the view on your screen right now is at Mission Control Houston. Mission Control in Houston and our facility here in Hawthorne are connected to the International Space Station and the Crew-11 astronauts right now on a communications network known as the Big Loop. When we hear that call come through, you'll very likely hear whoever is speaking announce which loop they're speaking on so that we can follow along with the astronauts and understand who's in the loop. On the right-hand side of your screen now, you've got that view of Mission Control Hawthorne as well. So as Rob mentioned earlier, following deorbit and splashdown, Zena, Mike, Kimiya, and Oleg will have spent 167 days in space, orbiting the Earth more than 2,600 times. Crew-11 saw the arrival of 5 visiting vehicles since their arrival in August, including SpaceX's CRS-33 resupply mission, Progress 93, Northrop Grumman's 23rd resupply mission, JAXA's HTV-X1, and Soyuz MS-28. They also saw the departure of 3 visiting vehicles, including NASA's SpaceX Crew-10, Progress 92, and Soyuz MS-27. Mike Fincke will have spent 549 days in space, the 4th most cumulative spaceflight time by a U.S. astronaut and 20th on the all-time list, as Rob noted earlier. Kimiya Yui
on the Big Loop, undock sequence commanded.
So there we heard the call out from Mission Control that we are go for undock and the receipt of that command from Dragon. With Dragon now getting ready to undock, Rob will take us through that process. Rob?
Okay, Ronnie, thanks very much. The International Space Station is currently flying just off the southwest coast of Australia. at an altitude of 260 statute miles. As you've indicated, the undocking
Dragon
command
SpaceX
has been issued.
On the big loop, umbilical demate complete and nominal. Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
The hooks are beginning to drive. Again, 2 sets of hooks, 12 hooks in all. Once they're open, then Dragon will be free to begin its journey away from the Earth, from the space-facing port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. There will be a series of burns. There will be 2 so-called undocking burns. The first will be 1.5 seconds in duration, the second 5 seconds in duration, followed by 2 so-called departure burns, one of 16 seconds in duration, the second of 22 seconds in duration. That will accelerate Dragon's rate of separation from the international outpost to a point in which it will exit the so-called keep-out sphere, and then ultimately the approach ellipsoid to begin the rest of its journey. Even though the undocking is coming about 15 minutes behind schedule, based on the work that was required to prepare the crew for undocking, this will not affect the rest of the timeline. There will be some burn adjustments made by the SpaceX engineers in Hawthorne, but it will all lead to a splashdown off the coast of San Diego for the 4 Crew-11 crew members at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, 12:41 a.m. Pacific Time to wrap up this 167-day mission. This view of Endeavour at the zenith or space-facing port of the Harmony module, what Ronnie mentioned, the CRS-33 cargo craft, that is docked to the forward port of the Harmony module and will remain in place until after the next crew, the Crew-12 crew, arrives
Dragon
at the station in a few weeks.
First set of hooks open, nominal. First set of hooks open, nominal.
The second set of hooks now beginning to open. We are committed to an undocking, standing by for those hooks to fully retract. The departure of Endeavour will leave Sergei Kud-Sverchkov, NASA's Chris Williams, and Roscosmos' Sergei Mikheyev as a 3-man crew for the next few weeks until Crew-12 arrives. The interface between Dragon and the station has no longer been sealed. Standing by for physical separation. About 20 seconds away from physical separation.
Dragon SpaceX, all hooks open, nominal. SpaceX, all hooks open, nominal.
Dragon copies.
Undocking confirmed. Endeavour begins its journey home with the Crew-11 crew. Undocking
Dragon
confirmed.
SpaceX, separation confirmed. Dragon SpaceX, separation confirmed.
Dragon copies, stay the same. Dragon copies, stay the same.
good undocking burn, 4:20 p.m. Central Time, 5:20 p.m. Eastern Time for undocking, as Dragon and the International Space Station flew 260 statute miles south of Australia.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Depart, burn 0 complete.
So we've had 3 good departure burns. The undocking burns 1 and 2, departure burn 0. So despite the accelerated nature of the timing of this undocking for Crew-11, the crew has executed everything by the book as they begin about a 10.5-hour journey to a splashdown off the coast of San Diego in the wee hours Thursday morning.
Houston, station on 2, ISS thrusters are enabled. Houston copies.
That the voice of Chris Williams of NASA on board the station as we look inside Dragon over the shoulders of Zena Cardman and Mike Fincke. We expect Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid and for joint operations to conclude between Houston and Hawthorne in the neighborhood of about 4:40 p.m. Central, 5:40 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up is Endeavour's departure and exit from the keep-out sphere, the first of these 2 boundaries that are used to essentially measure the neighborhood of the International Space Station during rendezvous and departure operations. Once again, the view over the shoulders of Zena Cardman and Mike Fincke, Endeavour's commander and pilot, the 2 NASA astronauts, amongst the 4 Crew-11 crew members heading home for a splashdown early Thursday morning off the coast of San Diego. We're coming up on depart burn 1 and then the exit out of the keep-out sphere as you look at the flight control team at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California.
As Rob mentioned, we are now standing by for that departure burn 1. And at this point, because Dragon has disconnected from the International Space Station, it's relying entirely on its own power sources, from batteries and generated through solar cells, instead of taking power and telemetry from the space station. You can follow along with the telemetry that we're tracking in Mission Control at the bottom of your screen. When we step into this departure burn, you'll see the initial distance between Dragon and the space station increase further. You also may see the rate come back up. The thrusters on board the Dragon spacecraft are located in the service section, and this burn will last about 22 seconds. In that lower graphic right now, you can see that we're activating some of those micro adjustments as we follow along. Even though all of this is taking place very methodically and very slowly, both of these vehicles are traveling about 17,000 miles an hour. So this is a very carefully...
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 1 complete and nominal. This time, you are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. Reminder that ground will be deactivating the big loop following exit from the approach ellipsoid.
We are go for 4.012 suit doffing with a nominal depart burn, and we will be reconfiguring the big loop once we get out of the ellipsoid.
So we got confirmation there from Mission Control and a readback from Dragon that they have exited this dynamic phase of flight and can now take off their spacesuits. As I was mentioning, this is a pretty carefully choreographed set of maneuvers, but now that we're through departure burn 1, we know that we've exited the keep out sphere, which is a 200-meter radius invisible line around the International Space Station. Before moving into the keep out sphere, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross that imaginary boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if the spacecraft lost all maneuvering capability. This safety zone is set up to govern any visiting spacecraft, Dragon or any of the others we mentioned earlier in the webcast, when they're arriving or departing from the space station. Some beautiful views of the Earth from up in space there on your screen right now, too. And now that we are focused primarily on Dragon, as Rob mentioned, because the vehicles have now separated, you're following along with the speed and altitude of Dragon in the lower left-hand corner of your screen.
Dragon end station. This is Houston on the big loop. Dragon has exited the keep out sphere. Endeavour crew, enjoy the ride home.
Endeavour crew copies on the big loop. Thank you.
So there we heard confirmation from both teams again that we have exited that keep out sphere. And now we're waiting for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, or AE for short, which is another imaginary shape. This time a 3-dimensional ellipsoid, kind of a football shape, measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as that keep out sphere. One of the key differences with the AE, though, is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. Instead of the 4 orbits we mentioned earlier, that means that a spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again, even if it lost all maneuvering for that call-out, once we hear confirmation that Dragon is outside of the AE. So to recap what brought us to today, the hatches between the International Space Station and Dragon were closed earlier today at approximately
SpaceX Crew-11, cabin mic, com check, how do you read?
With our crew settled.
SpaceX has you loud and clear from the cabin mic.
We also loud and clear, thank you.
We just had good confirmations there that our Crew-11 team can hear Mission Control here in Hawthorne loud and clear. And our crew is beginning to settle in for that 10.5-hour journey back to Earth. So I'm going to toss it back to Rob over at NASA. Rob?
Thanks, Ronnie. The 2 spacecraft, Endeavour and the International Space Station, are currently flying just to the southeast of New Zealand, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. The range between Endeavour and the station will continue to open up to a safe distance that will lead in the wee hours Thursday at 1:51 a.m. Central Time, 2:51 a.m. Eastern Time, to a deorbit burn that will be a 13-minute, 15-second retrograde braking maneuver for Endeavour to slow the vehicle down by 87.5 meters per second. Just as is the case for any returning vehicle from low Earth orbit velocity, this will enable Endeavour to enter back into the Earth's atmosphere for all of the key activities that will be associated with its 50-minute return trip through the atmosphere, through the area of peak heating, a brief period of a loss of signal while plasma builds up around the Dragon itself, and then a reacquisition of signal prior to the deployment of drogue chutes and the main chutes that will enable Dragon to gently splash down off the coast of San Diego at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, 12:41 a.m. Pacific Time, early Thursday morning, wrapping up a 167-day mission. Once again, Crew-11 is on its way home a few weeks earlier than originally had been anticipated, but the crew is in good shape, ready for its arrival in the Pacific Ocean for a splashdown in the early morning hours on Thursday, where the SpaceX recovery team will quickly move into action to hoist the Dragon onto the well deck of the recovery ship and extract the crew, with their mission now having been completed. Everything has gone by the book. Endeavour in good shape. The International Space Station now crewed by 3 people, Chris Williams of NASA, Sergei Kud-Sverchkov, and Sergei Mikheyev of Roscosmos. They will be a 3-man crew for the next few weeks until the arrival of the Crew-12 crew on the next SpaceX Crew Dragon that will be launched from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. With that, we'll wrap it up from Mission Control here in Houston and go back to Ronnie Foreman at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne.
Thanks so much, Rob. With that, Crew-11 has officially departed the International Space Station. As we continue to move a safe distance from the station, we are preparing for that deorbit burn that Rob mentioned. Again, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of San Diego at approximately 12:41 a.m. Pacific Time, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by a SpaceX recovery vessel. As they rest up, our teams here will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure a safe return for our Dragon and Crew-11 astronauts. In case you are just joining us, we are following along as our Crew-11 astronauts depart the International Space Station. And right now we're standing by for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, or AE, which is an imaginary football shape that is about 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as the keep-out sphere, and basically governs the neighborhood of the International Space Station. One of the key differences between the approach ellipsoid that you see on the outside on the graphic on your screen and the keep-out sphere, which is that smaller inner circle, is that vehicles inside of the AE right now are where we are right now, are on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. That means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again, even if it lost all maneuvering. So we are standing by for that call out to hear that we have exited the AE and that our Crew-11 astronauts continue on their way home. Now, to recap, earlier today, the hatches between the International Space Station and Dragon were closed. Since then, the crew has settled in to begin their 10.5-hour journey back to Earth. The joint NASA and SpaceX teams pulled go to proceed with undocking, and the undock command was then sent, followed by umbilical retraction and hook opening, with physical separation taking place right on schedule at 2:20 p.m. Pacific, as the space station and Dragon were traveling about 260 statute miles south of Australia. Dragon then completed 2 of 4 departure burns and exited the keep-out sphere. We are again now standing by from Dragon crossing the approach ellipsoid to set the spacecraft and Crew-11 up for their path back to Earth. On splashdown tomorrow, we'll be marking the completion of a long-duration science and research mission for these 4 astronauts and the astronauts that were part of the broader expedition who are still on board the International Space Station. So because Dragon is still inside the approach ellipsoid, we are still currently in joint operations. And you're watching Mission Control Houston and Mission Control Hawthorne working together in the 2 different blocks on your screen. We mentioned this earlier in the webcast too, but you can follow along with Dragon's telemetry in the bottom of your screen. We just had that range measurement come up that you can track, looking at just about 800 meters away from the International Space Station right now. We're also tracking right now that about 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer is going to be the right boundary of that approach ellipsoid. So right now we're watching the number increase, which is exactly what we want to see as our Crew-11 astronauts depart the space station. Again, we are standing by right now for that departure from the approach ellipsoid. You can keep following that, as I mentioned, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. That is the distance between Dragon and the International Space Station. And we think we'll hit that 1,000-meter, 1-kilometer mark here in just about another minute. If you were with us earlier in the broadcast, you know that we had great views of Dragon as it left the International Space Station. But now that we've moved away from it and we are on the darker side of the Earth, our views have gone offline for now. Obviously, we're still in touch with our astronauts, and we'll bring those images back to you either later in this broadcast or when we pick it up later this evening to follow splashdown and recovery of our Crew-11 astronauts. Coming up on about 970 meters away from the International Space Station. So we should hear that call out any second that we have exited the approach ellipsoid. Tracking 1 kilometer on your screen right there. So right now we're just waiting for that call out over the big loop between Mission Control Houston on the left and Mission Control Hawthorne on the right.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a safe free drift trajectory. Houston will be taking down the big loop shortly. Expect ISS audio traffic to cease. Following final comms, request swap of audio destination to Dragon to ground. Post swap, contact ground on Dragon to ground via the cabin mic for a comm check.
Dragon copies, in work.
So that announcement we just heard from Mission Control Hawthorne officially marks departure from the approach ellipsoid and the end of joint operations. That's why you heard our team explaining how communications protocols would change from here through the end of the mission. Crew-11 has officially departed the International Space Station. And now we'll expect them back here on Earth about 10.5 hours from now, again splashing down off the coast of San Diego. The crew is currently doffing or removing their spacesuits to settle in for that ride home. Splashdown should be early tomorrow morning at 12:41 a.m. Pacific Time, 2:41 a.m. Central, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by a SpaceX recovery vessel. As they rest up, our teams here will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure safe return for Dragon and our Crew-11 astronauts. Meanwhile, we'll rejoin you for live visual coverage starting roughly 1 hour prior to splashdown, so we'll be back at about 11:40 p.m. Pacific. As always, you can find mission updates on X at NASA, at SpaceX, and on the web at nasa.gov. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you on our Crew-11 astronauts again soon.